Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another edition of Flashpoint, a program of issues and ideas. Flashpoint is brought to you by the Lawrence Debate Union at the University of Vermont and is available both as a broadcast and also for on-demand viewing at the website debate.uvm.edu. My name is Nadir Rahman and I am from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and I shall be your facilitator for the program. Joining me is a panel of students from South Asia who are attending workshops and programs at the University of Vermont to study United States institutions. We are also all participating in the World Debate Institute. Let's meet them.
Good afternoon, I am Kuratalan Mufti. I'm from Pakistan, belonging to a city called Hyderabad.
I'm Kamil, I'm from New Delhi, India.
I'm Umul Khair from Bangalore city in India.
I'm Khola from Pakistan and I'm from Ahmedabad.
I'm Amna and I'm from the capital city of Pakistan known as Islamabad.
Today's topic is the global food crisis, and I think the best way to start this off would be to quote the World Food Programme, who have in fact said that the current food crisis is a silent tsunami. Anyone here like to agree with that?
I completely agree with you. Ban Ki-moon said the same thing. The Economist has already had an issue on it, and we need to agree that the situation is more serious than what's been anticipated in the last few months.
World Food Programme also said that they have to cover up the people for about 2.55 million of Afghans to provide them food and stuff, but only 38% of those people have been covered. And the reason behind is because the Pakistan has put a ban over their export stuff to provide them food, which has been an essential country to provide the food towards them.
We have panelists from 3 different nations here. Would you like to state the problems individually for your nations?
Sure. Pakistan has, as I belong to the Pakistan, so Pakistan has been facing some sort of these kind of problems of food crisis and stuff, but it has never faced the problems that has been so severe like as this year we have. It has never been such severe. And we being an agriculture state, we don't supposed to face these kind of problems. If we are facing these kind of problems, this completely shows that we have lack of planning from the government side.
Sure.
And because of Pakistan's wheat problem, Afghanistan is suffering a lot. And basically Pakistan has 3 million Afghanistan refugees in Pakistan. So they have to feed their own nation, their own citizens, and also the Afghan refugees. So the condition is really difficult for Pakistan these days.
In India, high food prices can turn quickly into political crisis. Exactly 10 years ago, a ruling government lost election because the price of onions was too high, which tells how important the electoral concern over inflation is. The Peterson Institution's Arvind Subramanian told an April Global Economic Prospects meeting.
So I understand. So the problem is let's say it's, both of you have mentioned it's kind of political, both the problems. And coming from Bangladesh, I'd have to say the problem is like that as well. The political system for many years, for the last 15, 16 years, has not properly prepared people for the price, for the fact that prices would eventually go up in the food, in the world food market. And this year, Bangladesh has been hit particularly badly. The problem is very simple when it comes to one product in Bangladesh, that is rice. Other nations are refusing to export to us, and import prices from whatever few nations will export to us have skyrocketed. We set the problem up. Can anybody talk about any of the causes of this problem?
In Pakistan, we had a bumper crop last summer, and what happened was that the previous government, just to raise the statistics of how they improved the economy of our country, we in Pakistan basically exported to India the wheat, which is the staple food of Pakistan. And we didn't really notice that the next crop might not be a bumper crop. And basically there was a shortage. And now because of that, this year there have been long queues and protests that have turned violent because people are they don't have food.
Well, in India,
Hungry population is
we have to look at this problem slightly differently. It's slightly psychological as well. Don't forget, India is the second largest producer of rice in the world. It's among the top 3 producers of food grain in the world. So when you have a food shortage, or when you have a supply-demand mismatch, the problem becomes psychological. There's panicking. It's a policy issue in our country as well. In 2004, we roughly had 65 million tons of food grain available as a buffer stock. But for the fear of all that food getting rotted away, we somehow exported all of that food at like bottom rock prices. And when the food crisis actually hit, we did not have a buffer stock. And another thing is the government policy was such throughout the 1990s that we shifted cultivable land from food grains to cash crops. So we actually reduced our overall capacity. We've reduced our overall capacity over the last 15 years or so.
Bringing Bangladesh into this, I'd have to say policy is a big problem in Bangladesh with regard to our food security, because there's this traditional view that we must increase our exports, and one of our main exports has been shrimp. So what's happened to the south of Bangladesh is that a lot of arable land, they, instead of growing rice on it, they're growing, they're having shrimp, they're cultivating shrimp on it. So for a country very small with 150 million people, we are producing more shrimps, we are exporting more of that, but we aren't feeding 150 million people, which should be the backbone of any successful government.
I
Oh, yeah.
I want to tell about because the year 2007, 2008 saw dramatic world food prices rises,
Yeah.
bringing a state of global crisis and causing political and economical instability and social unrest in both poor and development nations. So systematic causes for the worldwide food prices increase continue to be the subject of debate. Initial causes of the late 2006 price spikes included unseasonable droughts in grain producing nations and rising oil prices.
You've brought on two very good points which we'd like to move
Yes.
into right now. The energy crisis, the global energy crisis.
Well,
what role does this have to play in the problem?
We must remember the fact that we are living in the 21st century. Even developing nations have highly mechanized agricultural sectors. And the fact is, an oil crisis has a direct impact on that. High energy costs directly translate into the overall cost of food. So because of the mechanized agriculture, and secondly, they directly affect the pesticide and fertilizer costs as well. And I think so in some nations that would be a problem related to electricity, the availability of
Exactly. In
electricity as well.
Pakistan, we have like frequent power cuts, and because of this, it's like distributing our continuous production of the wheat and stuff.
A lot of our flour mills have shut down
Yeah,
because
exactly,
of
because
the
of that.
electricity problem. And apart from that, you talk about policy. Our government doesn't want to open up direct trading with India. Why? Because the people in power who are like the elite, the business class and the feudal
Traders.
class, they don't want direct trading so that they can have indirect trading and they can increase their profits when they sell it to the local farmers. And they don't care whether the local farmers are suffering because of that.
I think on this point, for the energy crisis, for the international energy crisis, Bangladesh is actually suffering a lot. What little rice production we do have is being severely hampered by the fact that we've increased our oil prices less than 3 weeks ago, 34% in one overnight. So now even what many people leave out of the problem is the fact that maybe the production of food becomes more expensive, but transportation of that wheat
Exactly.
to the
Yeah.
market
Don't
eventually,
forget
even
that.
that goes up with this current
Exactly.
energy crisis. Umul hit on a very interesting point when she talked about droughts over the past few years. That brings us to a far more global topic.
Exactly.
If we zoom out of the Indian subcontinent, climate change. What effect does climate change have
Well,
on?
let's remember a fact that firstly, climate change is a reality that the whole world is facing right now. And maybe what no one
Major part of the
anticipated was
crisis.
that while everyone was focusing on the effect it would have on the North and the South Pole, people forgot that fresh water supplies, irrigation, and monsoon and whatever summer cycles were to be affected as well. And that's what's happened. Australia has had a drought for 7 years continuously. Australia is among
And
the
also
major
southern
exporters.
Africa, and we are having flooding in Western Africa, and there is extreme frost in China. So these are the climatic problems due to which
Ukraine
food
as well.
crisis there.
Ukraine's
Yes.
had a drought as well.
And
so
Northern Europe is seeing an increased
temperature. Exactly.
temperature.
Yeah, and for the poor people, it's the matter of life and death.
Climate change is likely to trigger a risk of hunger in India by affecting cereal production by as much as 18% because of flood and droughts. UN agency has warned this.
Okay.
And apart from this, we can talk about how the multinational corporations have a stronghold on the grain.
Yeah.
For example, Monsanto, all these big companies, they are making a huge profit because of this food crisis. And Monsanto reported, which is a global multinational company, its profits increased from $1.44 billion to $2.22 billion. And Cargill, which is another company, its net earning has increased to 86% in the past 3 months.
So, so hoarding by international companies.
Well, that's one issue. Another issue is, I totally agree with them. Right now international companies have roughly 25 to 30% of the international stock with them. Huge go downs. They have huge corporate farms all over the Midwest of US. And what's happened there? Again, climate change. A large part of these corporate farms are under half a feet of water.
Okay.
So you don't have production there. That's affecting international supply as well. Secondly, they're hoarding whatever excess stocks that they have. And on this point of hoarding, we can slightly go back to the subcontinent as well. We have a huge chain from the farmer to the market. And what happens? We have enough middlemen and go downs and enough links in the chain to increase the prices immediately. That's another reason for the price rise in the
But
subcontinent.
logically, what can be done about reducing those links in the chain, or is it a fact we simply have to live with, that there will be middlemen and the middlemen will make the money?
Well, the thing is, you can reduce the number of middlemen. For example, in India, you have a middleman for every 40 kilometers that wheat travels.
That should be a check, a government
Exactly.
policy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Okay. Where do you
Checking
think
government.
the UN fits into all this? Has the UN done enough to take control of this?
I don't think so. It has rather increased the crisis. It's like 55% more they'll be increased because they are like now transporting the food towards Miami.
Yeah.
And this is like increasing the crisis.
Well, the thing is, the UN should do a bit more than simply making
Yeah,
reports.
exactly.
Yeah.
The FAO
Okay.
finds it very convenient to give us reports in the subcontinent that food production is declining. We need to shift to other forms of modes of food production and so on. But let's remember, there is nothing like an international food stock agency that can provide food.
And I also think that they should have regulations on, like, I don't know whether this should be done or not, if it's legitimate or not for countries to actually ban exports because they want their citizens to not, be affected by the food crisis. What do you guys think?
But that is what has been happened in Pakistan. Pakistan has banned export towards Afghanistan. That has completely hitted over the
Still,
policy
the
of
major point
WF.
is that first you have to
WFP.
support your
Yeah,
own
exactly.
citizens, then you should
But
So-
what
so,
about in
no, but-
Kazakhstan? What happened?
Yeah, in Kazakhstan, almost according to a survey, the prices of wheat globally increased 25% when Kazakhstan announced a ban on their wheat export.
So one of the reasons why you've had a 77% increase in rice prices is because Vietnam, Thailand, China and India have banned exports of rice.
Can I play the devil's advocate here?
Yes,
Can you
please.
blame them? Can you blame
No
them
one
both?
can blame
No, we
them.
cannot
if
blame
it is-
them. It's a
Okay,
situation,
okay.
yeah.
So you're saying the UN should have an increased hand in the regulation of this?
I think there should be moderation. Like, you don't have to export all of your bumper crop,
Exactly.
but you can have a limited amount of
Unlimited.
exports.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take a slightly different view from
Sure.
the other panelists. Large countries, the major exporters and the major producers of food grains, they cannot act like bullies in this.
Okay.
India and China, not right now. I'm talking of a different scenario because we're taking a moral stance on this. In a different scenario where they have, let's say, 50 million tons of rice in a go down, I do not see what's wrong in sending 10 million tons to maybe Bangladesh where people are starving. Let's forget that this is humanity. All of us are human beings. If you have something in excess, as long as you don't need it, I'm sure we can share it with other people.
Yeah, but that's what we are talking about. If you have something in excess, you should go for it. Share
Well,
it with others.
while
But
we're
like
still
keep
talking-
something for your own self too.
While we're still talking about the causes, and we're talking about
The point is if it is in excess.
Yeah, exactly.
If it is not, then it should not be
when we're
exported.
talking about large countries, we've left out, let's say, of course, the European Union is not a country, but we haven't even touched on something like agricultural subsidies in the European Union and America. How does this affect How does this affect the global food
Agricultural
crisis?
subsidies, basically in countries, the farmers, they're exploiting this agricultural subsidies in a sense that they are utilizing this for their own benefits to produce ethanol when they know they are going to get lucrative subsidies for the production of crops for ethanol. So they will obviously use it for ethanol instead of producing the crops for
But
food.
I say the agricultural subsidy, the global food crisis has renewed cause for removal of distorting agricultural subsidies. In developed countries, support to farmers in OECD countries total 280 billions USD annually, which compares to official development assistance of just 80 billion USD in 2004.
280 billion given in agricultural
Exactly.
subsidies.
I
That's-
keep
that's-
saying
that's
that
a
all
sta-
over again.
That's a startling amount. Wasn't there an interesting analogy from Belgium?
Oh yes, yes. The thing is, Belgium has a very small population, very small cattle population. They're not a major, cattle rearing country, but they give these huge subsidies to people who do cattle rearing. The fact is, the per capita income of India is like $680 US, and the per capita subsidy given to a cow in Belgium is $723.
You know what? It may be a laughing matter. It may be rather flippant of us to laugh about this here, but it is amazing that in a world where an agricultural subsidy given to a cow is more than the per capita income of somebody of a nation of 1.1 billion people.
Exactly.
And we've touched on ethanol, but can anybody here tell me about ethanol? Do you see it? Because the statistics I've read, okay, 5% of U.S. agricultural farmland, only 5% goes to ethanol. Does that affect the world food crisis in a major way? That 5%.
It's not about the 5%. Remember that 5% is a huge amount. The U.S. is a huge producer of food crops. So even that 5% makes an impact at the global scale.
And there was a World Bank report that recorded that food prices have risen from February 2002 to recent days to 140%. And this 75% of this 140% is because of biofuel and ethanol.
Let me play the devil's advocate once more. We are running out of oil. The world knows this. Biofuel is an option. Isn't this something we should pursue?
There are other options: solar energy, wind energy.
Okay, look at the numbers. The number of people in the world is not about to decrease in the next 50 years. The oil is going to be gone in the next 50 years. You still need that food. You need much more food. You're going to have 1.7 billion people in India by 2050. 1.4 billion in like China alone. So can you imagine a situation where we divert land from producing food grains to producing ethanol, when ethanol it's non-viable because of the shortage of land. We've used every possible corner of the globe to grow food, save Antarctica. So I don't think so it's a long-term viable option.
We've talked about the causes of this. Can we move on to the effects? What would you say are the major effects for, let's say, in the Indian subcontinent first, and move on from there?
In the Indian subcontinent. Okay. Officially, we have 280 million people living on less than $1 a day. But in actual terms, you would have something like, maybe 750 million people living on less than $2 a day. The fact is, for these 750 million people, 80% of their expenditure is on food. And in the last 1 year, we've had a 83% increase in the food price index in India. So can you imagine a situation? And let me tell you, we've had an economic slowdown at the same time. So you've gone from growing at 9.7% to maybe 8.3%. So that's affected incomes as well.
Yeah.
And don't leave out the increase in oil costs and other things and so on, please. You need to.
And around the globe, almost 100 million people are facing severe hunger, and 37 developing countries are in urgent need of food.
Whereas in Pakistan, there's like in the north continent of Pakistan, it has been said that by the researchers and the experts that if this food crisis has not been not brought back into the control, there'll be like law and order situation. Other than that, like street crime will increase.
As for the law and order situation, I read reliably online that 37 countries have had food riots of some sort
Exactly.
in the past 9 months. 37 countries. From where to where? Does anybody have any idea?
UAE, Uzbekistan,
Haiti.
Cameroon,
Haiti.
in Africa.
In Africa. We often, when talking about
China.
China, India,
China,
Bangladesh.
In
India.
Pakistan.
in
Pakistan,
Pakistan,
exactly.
Bangladesh itself.
India.
When talking about the food crisis and the Asian subcontinent, What we also at times miss out is Africa. And Africa is going through severe drought, all of this caused by climate change, a topic
But
we've
West
touched on.
Africa is going through floods.
West Africa is going through floods.
Floods, yes. Southern Africa is affected by drought, and
Is
West
there a
Africa
way out for Africa? How does Africa feed itself? Because in the subcontinent, basically, when it boils down to it, you can convince a government. You can go over to India and say,
I
give
think
us a
we
little
talk
extra.
about India and China having responsibility, but what about America? What
Exactly.
about
What
you
about
know,
the-
the
exactly,
multinational
EU,
companies
exactly.
that are making a profit out of people dying of hunger? We should, the UN, if it's such a great
Okay,
organization.
Another fact. You're saying, where will Africa get its food from? 41% of the food grains grown in USA are used for feeding cattle.
41%.
41%. And 68% of the soya is used for feeding cattle.
So am I to say your suggestion is divert that 41%?
Exactly. Have less tender beef
Less
to eat,
tender.
and just like,
Does anybody-
make sure
because
people
we
in
also
Africa
eat
eat.
food which is less tender,
know.
and
Does
they
anybody
also
know
eat
the reason why that 41% is fed to the cattle?
so that
For
Yes,
the meat is more
tenderizing.
tender,
Is-
to make the meat more
To
tender.
make the meat more tender.
Yeah,
So you're
exactly.
saying have less tender meat and 41% of your wheat grain, send that
It
to Africa
needs
and
more
Asia.
of cooking.
Exactly.
So that's okay.
Cook it for 5
But
minutes.
apart
more.
from that, in China and India as well, because people are, there's a rising middle class, and there's a bigger demand for meat. So because of that, there's like 7 pounds of grain is used to feed 1 pound of eventual beef.
Exactly.
So a lot of grain is also being wasted, not wasted, but used by other countries
That's
apart from
misuse
America.
of
Can I,
food.
can, I, can I pose a question? For us to move past this food crisis, do you think around the world people's eating habits have to change? Do you think that's an option? Do you think that is something which should be exercised, something which should be looked into?
Yes, definitely.
Certainly,
Do you think people? It's just a suggestion from what I've heard. If 7 pounds is equivalent to 1 pound of meat, do you think people should eat less meat and more grains? Do you think something like that should happen?
Well, I'll tell you something. Maybe if you're not changing the habits, you make it more efficient.
Changing your diet is like a very slow process. Everybody can't just stop
Exactly.
eating.
It's,
Stop
it's,
eating
it's a
meat
long-term
and
process, it's an evolutionary process about how your diet comes around. But what you can do is make it more efficient. McDonald's wastes roughly, 500,000 ton of flour each year, on burgers that went stale or something of that sort. So you need to stop that.
As for the effects, there's a very serious effect in India about farmer suicides. Could anybody talk to us on that?
The fact remains that in 1991, when we liberalized our economy, we promised our farmers that they would have better opportunities. They would get better prices, international markets, and so on. In the mid-90s, we told them food grains are not the way forward. You will not get that international market unless you go in for cash crops. We diverted them to cash crops. What we didn't realize at the time was that India has a subsidy of almost $20 billion. But the problem is it's nothing compared to that $280 billion. So even before starting, let's say, growing cotton, an Indian farmer is already disadvantaged by $400 per pound of cotton.
Okay.
So there's no chance he can compete internationally. What happened was, we had poor farmers, right? Like 60% of our farmers were again, in the poverty cycle and so on. So they had to take huge loans, big loans to facilitate, growing of cash crops. What happened at the same time? Yields were decent. I'm not saying yields were bad. What happened was we were not able to give them the cost. We were not able to protect them from the international subsidy. What happens? If you're crippled by a loan and you mortgaged your house, everything that you own, what do? You commit suicide. And the part that shakes me every day, okay, I'll give you a figure which is shocking. Right now, every 17 minutes, an Indian farmer is committing suicide because of international subsidy that won't allow him to compete. Over the last 15 years, 90,000 farmers have committed suicide. And the saddest bit is,
That's shocking.
they'll take a loan for, say, fertilizer, pesticides, and seeds. And then again, don't forget, all of these things before liberalization would have been provided by the state, but now all of these are sold by international companies that sell the same thing at like,
Like
Exactly.
poorest will suffer
Exactly.
a lot.
and
Okay.
you take that loan, and what do? When you can't pay back that loan, you take the fertilizer and the pesticide you've taken as a loan, and you consume it and you commit suicide.
We've talked about the causes, the effects. Any suggestions from here? Any suggestions how to move on with this problem?
I think ethanol production should be reduced, and the land should be diverted to produce food grains.
To produce food grains.
Yeah.
Do you think the UN do you think the UN should actively do something about this, or do you think it's up to America, because they claim to be the international watchdog of all things these days? Do you think
They
it's
both
America's
need to
duty or
work
the
together.
United Nations?
I think that those in power, who are the superpower basically, and the UN should basically keep a check on, you know, a lot of things. If the UN is for this cause, then they should check whether the farmers or the landowners are actually hoarding the profits. I think
Exactly.
every government, because it is elected supposedly by the people, it should keep a check for the goodwill of the people.
I
So
think that changes the policies also.
Policies. And you think you think around the world national policies should be tweaked?
100%.
Should be
There
tweaked?
is a need. We cannot have national policies that disadvantage both the poor at home and the people who are dependent upon your food.
Okay.
You need policies that are encompassing, that are more moderate. As Amna said, moderation is the key.
What about a suggestion from Kofi Annan? He was speaking specifically about Africa when he said if the richer countries helped out in green technology, Africa could double. This is what he said. He said it could double their farm output in 10 years. Do you think green technology
Okay.
will help from
As
from
long
richer
as
countries?
oil companies and other lobbies ensure that green technology is the most expensive technology on earth, I don't think so there's a way forward.
So basically, you're blaming multinationals here again. We move back to multinationals.
We
you
do
think-
in some ways.
Do you,
We
think,
need
the,
to
do you
stop.
think the role of the multinationals should be regulated by their respective
course.
countries?
There should be a limit.
But if there's a private economy and it's all about profit and self-interest, then how can you regulate it if the system is actually for these multinational companies?
And they are being profited the most with this food crisis.
All of you seem a little bleak about this. Is there no hope in the future?
I think
Well-
if everybody, even about the climate change, if everyone is more environmentally conscious, then perhaps.
Perhaps there can be
Perhaps
a change.
things
Yeah,
like
it will take some
You
time.
talk
It
you
will
talk
take
about
some-
hope. I'll be pessimistic here. I'll be
cannot-
pessimistic right now. The fact is, this is not a short-term crisis. This is a long-term crisis
It's gonna take time.
within agriculture, the way we grow our food. Climate change is going to hit us. It's already hit us. It's going to get worse in the future. What we need to do is we need to change our agriculture production model. It needs to be more resistant to weather. It needs to be more green. It needs to be more localized. You should start using local varieties of seeds that are used to
So
drought.
much money is used on building weaponry and stuff like that to destroy each other. We're already going to end
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
going towards our destruction. Why don't we spend more
spending
money,
more money
on
on
science and
productivity.
technology?
Exactly.
Exactly.
and giving opportunity for the employment opportunity.
Okay. So very quickly, 20 years from now, where do you see this problem?
20 years from now, I see this problem. It depends on the policy. If we have like good policy system, if we have a good government, if that government is working on that policy very well, I see that we have a good hope. We really have a good hope and we have a good future. But if not, we still are like going the way we are.
Yeah.
I don't see any future at all.
And
I also think it will take a long time now.
So you don't see.
I do see hope, but
It's a
very
touch-
little.
it's
but
a
very
rabbit
little.
I
It's a
see I see a
dress.
change in the way we grow food,
Okay.
in the way we feed these cattle.
And on this rather damp note, but I hope it still leaves us with a little bit of hope.
There is hope.
Thank you so much for watching this edition of Flashpoint, and don't forget our advice.
Think for yourself.